went to Auburn, and the first experience was quite negative. I didn't have anyone other than my father who went to college for 30 years before. So I didn't know what a GPA was. I was going to the Deep South. So it's 1980. It's 15 years, 1982, 15 years after the race riots. I'm going down to Auburn, Alabama. My parents drive me down 18 hours. My dad had to be at work, so he could drive down, stay 4 hours, and drive back. And here I am in Auburn, Alabama, and my roommate, we walked into that room, and my roommate's not there. I walked in with my parents to drop me off for college, 1,200 miles away, and there's a huge swastika flag on the wall, and all these Nazi books about Hitler. It turns out my roommate was a espousing Nazi, an up-and-coming Nazi from West Virginia, a mountain kid, a hillbilly from West Virginia. And my mother burst into tears. And my dad looked over at me, and he said, "Welcome to the South, son." I just sat there taking it all in, thinking, well, this isn't going to go over too well. And my dad said, "Good luck." My mom was sobbing, saying, "We can't leave him here." And my dad said, "He'll figure it out." And that's always been the way it's been. He'll figure it out. And I did. There were several ways to address the situation, and one of which was to meet this kid and see what he was about. I came with a myriad of stories from my relatives. Some were drafted to fight for the Nazis. Some were Americans, and some were brothers. My grandmother's brother was an American. My grandfather's brother was captured by the Americans and held as a POW in Texas. He was captured during the African campaign. Uncle Enzo was held as a POW by the Americans. I knew firsthand World War II stories. So it didn't take long after discussing with this coal miner kid, after a while, that he really wasn't a Nazi. He really didn't know anything about World War II. He didn't know anything about Hitler. And it took about 2 months or 3 months of some conversations before everything came down. And he realized he was just bored and looking for something to cling to. We later became friends. He named his kid, I'm the godfather of his kid, and we stay in touch. His name is Joey Casella, and I see him 3 or 4 times a year at meetings, the former Nazi. And it's one of those life stories where you're in Alabama, but going through that trying experience of rooming with a Nazi also came with, you're supposed to be in school. And so there were some trying experiences because some of the other roommates were dealing with drugs. And this is a foreign experience to me. I didn't have this. I came down from New York. I'm the New Yorker in the Deep South, not exactly being embraced by some of the Southern kids. And then I got this roommate who's a Nazi and the other roommate who's dealing drugs. The bottom line is I almost flunked out of school. So the first quarter down in Auburn, I made a D and a bunch of mediocre grades. I made a 2.1 GPA. And to get into college, to get into vet school 4 years later, you had to have a minimum of a 2.5, and most kids had a 3.5 or better to get in. I made a 2.1. To add to the story,
how'd you pull that out?
About 2 weeks after arriving in Alabama, having met my drug dealing roommate and my Nazi roommate, I thought it was a good idea because the guys I bonded with were across the hallway. They were in the military. One was in the one was in the Navy, one was in the Marines, and one was an Army Ranger. The Army Ranger is my good friend Richard Jansen. He's an amazing guy, and they espoused the military. They said, "You should get to know the military." I said, "No better way than to join, huh?" So I signed up for the reserves while I was down there. So I signed up for the Air Force Reserves, went through the boot camp program while down there, and so having survived the boot camp program and these roommates, I successfully achieved a 2.1 GPA. Called up my father, and he was thinking, what happened? I drove my son I drove my son 1,200 miles, and he's flunking college, joined the Air Force Reserves, and has all this going on. And I said, "Dad, I'm not sure I can cut it." I said, "You need a 3.5 or better to be a veterinarian." And clearly, I'm not cutting the mustard. I only have a 2.1. And this is one of those big moments in life where he said, "Son, I don't know what's going on down there." He said, "But you've your whole life wanted to be a veterinarian." He said, "Are you going to let a bunch of people who never met you before tell you you're not going to do what you want to do your whole life?" And I thought about it and said, "Yeah, you're right. That's kind of lame." So I hunkered down and said, I stayed in the Air Force Reserves, and I kicked out the drug dealers with some help with the ex-Nazi, and I got together and we kicked the drug dealers out. And I studied my butt. I had to go to meet with the advisor for college, and he said, "You're on probation, kid." I said, "I can do it." And he said, "Do what?" And I said, "I want to take overload hours. I want to repeat the class I made a D in. I want to sign up for extra classes." He said, "You can't. It's against the rules. You're on probation. You have to take a reduced caseload." And I begged him to trust me. And it was one of those moments again where he said, "Okay, your loss." And I did it. I think I made a 3.8 GPA that year, and I don't think I ever dropped below. I made a 3.9, a couple 4s for the next 3 years straight. Ended up graduating college in 3 years because from that point on, I took overload hours for the next 3 years to show I could do this under pressure. And I kept my grades above a 3.8 for 3 consecutive years, got my BS in biology in 3 years. I shaved a year off college, and I got it with honors. So, and got into vet school on early admission. So I ended up getting to vet school after 3 years of college. So it turned out to be a pivotal moment because I was ready to drop out and say, it's time to be a cop, which was my second career choice. I said, I can't cut it, Pop, but I'm glad he pushed me and challenged me.
Tell me about being a vet. How did that happen? How did you go
How did that happen?
from there to where you are now? And how did it happen?
I read somewhere that in every family there's a child that wants to be a veterinarian. It starts out that way, that love for animals and caring for, it probably starts with stuffed animals. But over time, when you start learning about what it takes, it kind of fades in most kids. And a handful of us survive and actually become veterinarians. So I don't know. I was told from my parents that they knew, I must have known early on, or they saw it in me early on. My earliest recollections were when we went to West Hills Day Camp. We're kind of legendary at West Hills Day Camp, having had 4 kids go there for an amazing number of years. I went there starting at 3 years of age, ABC Todd, I think they called us. Through 16, I worked there taking care of the horses. So my whole family went to West Hills. All my sisters went, and they had a lot of animals there. And I was always the guy that passed up playing soccer or volleyball or whatever sport they had us to go hang out with the goats. And one particular story I remember, there was at the end of the day, the roundup to pick up the kids, and none of the buses could pull out and leave until every kid was accounted for, and one kid was missing. And that would be me, because at the end of the day, I was heading towards the bus, and I noticed one of the goats cut his leg. And he was bleeding, and I wasn't going to allow that to happen. So I took off my shirt, and I stripped it out, and I made a bandage, and I'm dressing this goat's leg. And meanwhile, there's a search party sent out over this many-acre camp looking for the lost kid. And they couldn't find me, and I was in the goat corral, and I couldn't leave his side because I was treating his wound. And this went on for a while. They held up the entire evacuation of camp. And I remember the supervisor came with a megaphone screaming, Nicky Marino, and they found me over here, and I pointed out the reason why. I didn't get in trouble, but I was willing to miss the ride home to tend to the goat, and that probably was the first time I realized I'm pretty serious about this. You combine the exposure to animals that my mother brought into our lives with the love of science and medicine and my father's influence, a pediatrician, pediatrics, it just happened. But then the decision to go into veterinary versus human medicine was a difficult one. Then where to go? It was difficult for me because I knew my dad was an MD. I knew a lot of my family members were medical doctors, and here I was going outside the box. So having had that discussion with my dad, and him saying, it's not that bad a thing. Go. So I don't care what you want to be, just be the best at it. I was set on my path to pursue veterinary medicine. Where to go to school? I'm from New York, so Cornell's the obvious choice. But and I worked hard in school to get the grades to apply. But those are life's obstacles. My daughter Grace is getting ready to think about colleges as a sophomore in high school. And one of the things I pulled up was a letter I found. I'm great at saving things. My father's trait too. My father pulled up my birth certificate once to show me, actually the bill from the hospital, what it cost for my mother to deliver me. He has the bill. I think it was $300. He has everything. So do I. So I showed Grace about how hard you have to work. She wants to go to Cornell, and you have to work hard. And I found the rejection letter that Cornell sent me saying, nice try. We're disappointed. We're sorry to let you know your qualifications didn't match, and you're not going to Cornell. And I saved that. I saved that rejection letter as much as I saved my acceptance letter to Auburn. They're both important letters. And I told her that. I said, I got accepted to Auburn. And look what happened. I wanted to go to Cornell, and I got rejected. It didn't hold me back. I went to Auburn, and I got my BS in biology in 3 years. I got my veterinary degree, and the combined cost was $15,000 at a time when my friends all had $75,000 to $100,000 education debts. That was quite a blessing in disguise. So not getting into Cornell was a disappointment when I showed her. It really was where I wanted to go, but it's okay. It's okay. Sometimes things work out for a reason. But I saved the letter, saved them both, the Auburn acceptance and the Cornell rejection letter. And that was it. At Auburn, being in Auburn brought me close to my Aunt Fran. The only reason I applied to Auburn was all my relatives seemed to know I wanted to be a veterinarian. My relatives from Alabama, Grandma's sister, Aunt Fran, who we visited once, said, we have a great school down here. I remember my dad saying, why not? Let's take a look. Doesn't hurt to look. We visited and found it to be amazing. The nicest people in the world. Drove down there. I remember driving around and we were looking at a map because no one had GPS back then. And some man in a pickup truck saw us looking. He said, where are you all going? We said, we're looking for the vet school. And he said, follow me. I'll take you out yonder. And my dad looked at me and said, is this guy really going to drive out to the vet school? He had no business going out there. He just didn't want us to get lost. And we followed him out there. The guy drove us probably 5 or 6 miles out of his way and said, it's over here. You all have a good day. I looked at my dad thinking, are these people for real? Would that really just happen? And it just felt like a warm place. Then we went to Aunt Fran's house for dinner. Of course, the family's right there. They're 30 minutes away. Aunt Fran, and you had Brian, her son, Dennis, Elaine, and Barbara, her daughters. So they were all there. Chris, her son, had moved away, so I had Aunt Fran and Grandma's family were right there for me. So it became an easier choice once I saw family was there, 30 minutes away. And that's how it started. It came down to Alabama for 9 years I spent down in Alabama.
In school?
Well, I should correct that. I spent 3 years undergrad, 4 years of vet school, 7 years in Alabama, and 1 year at Georgia. I did my undergrad and my vet school in Alabama. It's quite the experience. Aunt Fran had me over every holiday, and some weekends I just go out there to hang out with Aunt Fran. And what was there to do at Aunt Fran's house? Look at photo albums and hear stories about my grandmother when she was a kid, and hear all the stories about her husband and what he was like. How did Aunt Fran end up in Alabama? She's Sicilian. Her family's from New York. So it was amazing, and I got to learn a lot more about the family. So it really was, again, another gift. And that's one of the things I learned in life. You get these obstacles thrown at you, but sometimes things for a reason. And I got to reconnect with those relatives. For all that time, I never would have had that experience had I gone to Cornell. I think you have to be passionate about what you want to do. And animals, science, biology, caring for those that need to be cared for. Those are the ingredients of my passion for my career. There are obstacles along the way, but it's that passion that allows you to achieve. There were kids that quit every step of the way. Whether an undergrad decided I can't hack it, I got that grade point average, whatever that was, 2.1. I don't want my kids to see that in the tape, but I got a 2.1. I almost failed out of college. Could have stopped there. When I interviewed for vet school, they said to me, I was on my practice interview because I only had 3 years of college. I wasn't supposed to be applying, but I was applying as a practice interview. They said, if you can't be a veterinarian, what would you want to be? And there were kids that rehearsed every answer in creation. I want to pick up animals on the highway and hug them before they die. These types of altruistic, I just want to save the world. And I hadn't put much thought into it. I was just being myself. They said, what do you want to be if you can't be a veterinarian? And I said, a sniper for the police department. And there were 3 interviewers that stopped, and they just looked at, they went like that, and they did one of these, and I thought, oh no, that was not the right answer. That wasn't what they were looking for. And they said, okay, that's about it for now. We'll speak to you later. And I left, and I thought, I just blew it. I got the acceptance to vet school, and I never knew what happened until many years later. One of the interviewees became a friend of mine, colleague, down the road. This is 15 years after my interview. And he said, I remember the day you sat on an interview. It's 15 years later. We're at a United Nations dinner. I'm being invited there by the guest of the university, and he's now a big rig at the university, Dr. McClary. And I'm sitting there at a black tie dinner at the UN, and he said, I remember your interview. And I'm thinking, why do you remember my interview? Actually, it's 20 years later. And he said, you sat there and you said, sniper for the police department. Because we all looked at each other and said, he's either crazy or incredibly honest, because no one would say that and expect to get into vet school. And we had a discussion, are you crazy or are you honest? And based on the rest of the interview, we said, he's a pretty honest guy. Because why would anyone say that unless they're just speaking the truth from their heart? And that was what I want. I knew I had a law enforcement affinity from my upbringing. Just protecting others and doing the right thing, and that's what I was going to do. And he said, we took you. We took a chance. We took you on you being honest. He said, it worked out pretty well for us. So I later found out what impact I had with that. I wouldn't advise anyone to say that again. I don't think that goes over too well. I think that's one of life circumstances. So, when you ask about veterinary medicine achieving that goal, it's these are obstacles. And it's that drive, that passion that allows you to overcome each of these circumstances and drive on. Medical school and veterinary school are very similar. They really challenge and push you. For me, it added the cultural difference added quite a bit. So I'm in the deep South. I'm from New York. I'm the different guy. And it added to it. I already went through the undergrad experience, survived the interview process. Here I am in vet school. And, I'm driving a car, a two-tone Oldsmobile with a license plate that says Italia, with an Italian horn on the front, and it has a moonroof. And these kids are driving pickup trucks, and most of them had a 9mm in the glove box, and they never take the key out of their car because they buy the car and they leave the key in the ignition, because they all live like that. And I have an alarm on my car. So we come from different cultures. And, I needed to make some extra bucks, and my buddy says, why don't you come with me? We're going to castrate a herd of cattle. We make $1 a head. And I find myself moonlighting castrating a herd of cattle. So overcoming cultural differences, eating the food. You can't imagine when you go to a different culture. You're eating okra. You're eating cobbler. Everything's a casserole. You don't see cannoli down south. You don't even see bagels. So one of the hardest things when I first arrived in the South was overcoming the cultural difference. It's not like it is today where things are a little bit more fluid. The internet hadn't been invented yet. So when I went down south, I couldn't even find the normal foods my mother made. I learned quickly I don't know how to cook. My mother taught me how to cook and gave me her favorite cooking book. I still have it. So I cooked from my mother's cooking book. So what became an obstacle became an asset. All of a sudden I can cook. Southern boys know how to boil things in hot oil. That's their version of cooking. You want a turkey, they throw it in hot oil. You want hush puppies, you throw a blob of dough in hot oil. Hot oil is part of their cooking skill set. So, and they cooked the deer they killed that day. Well, here's the boy from New York who just got taught how to cook from his mother. And my mom would ship, and my dad, on dry ice, the components of Italian meals to me. So I got cannoli shells and the filling on dry ice. I got manigotti shipped to me, because you couldn't get manigotti. They're shipping me manigotti. They're shipping me all this, like 50-pound container, 50 to 70 pounds these things would weigh. They come to the train station by freight. And I would unload it, bring it home, and I was growing my own basil. I joined the Italian club. There's an Italian club in Auburn. I would grow my own basil. We'd exchange oregano and basil. And these southern girls all of a sudden saw a man making homemade. I'd make my own manigotti. I'd make my own pesto. I'd send the girls out front to pick the leaves, and I'd make my own pesto sauce. So what became something that was an obstacle, a challenge to overcome, the cultural difference. I couldn't even eat a good meal. Next thing you know, I'm cooking the meal myself, and you become quite popular when you can cook, especially a man who can cook. So it became an asset. So there were a lot of those types of things that when faced with these challenges and there were kids that complained. There were a handful of kids from New York. This stinks, this, that, this, the other thing. Again, drawing off what my parents taught me and my grandparents taught me. You can overcome anything. And everything in life's a learning experience. Sometimes you learn how not to behave from somebody. So keeping that and going and drawing off that, I was able to overcome a lot of these things. Instead of letting them get me down, they became things that helped drive me ahead. That passion for my goal. I remember I walked into the dairy class, large animal. I had horse experience, tremendous horse experience in small, but no large. And first day I went to the director of that rotation and said, I don't know anything about cattle, and I'm likely to get killed, but I'm going to do everything you say to a T. So, I just want you to know that. And I was full-fledged in there. I was one of the top guys, got one of my top grades in large animal. When they had kids that were deficient, I couldn't keep up with the other kids. They formed a special rotation. It was myself and this kid from Texas. And they teamed us up with two kids that just couldn't do it. They couldn't put it together. They were barely holding on. They were just incompetent in large animal medicine. And they teamed us up with them to carry the load on the dairy rotation, to handle the dairy herd, because I could do it with the kid from Texas. And the kid from Texas did it his whole life. So again, when it came time to socialize, I didn't know anything. You know, I'm from New York. We had acid wash jeans. We had white high top sneakers. We had Miami Vice. That was, so when it came time to go out down south and they take you to the rodeo club, which they don't even like college kids there, and it's a rough crowd, and there's a mechanical bull, and you two-step and you buck dance, and I show up in acid wash jeans to my friend's house from Texas going, let's go to the rodeo club. His wife looked at me and said, Nick, you're going to get killed. And she said, take that outfit off, and I stripped down, and she put me in her husband's Wranglers and a pair of Ropers and one of these Wrangler shirts and a hat, and off I went, and I looked like I was in a Halloween costume. And I'm at the rodeo club, and I'm buck dancing, and they taught me how to two-step, and I still know how to two-step. So two-stepping and buck dancing, and then the class chipped in and bought me my own outfit. So my classmates bought me a lariat to learn how to rope. They bought me a cowboy hat. They bought me Wranglers and Ropers, and I was dressed to go out on the weekend with my southern friends and not get killed. So, you know, these obstacles and what I tell my kids will come up forever in your life. And it's not about being the same. In fact, I've already done the New York thing. It's time to experience other things. And you can let these things get you down, or you can use them as tools to grow. And these experiences helped me grow tremendously. And I learned to appreciate that culture. It may not be for me long term, but I really learned to appreciate that culture. And damn, I can two-step. The Animal Medical Center is the busiest, one of the busiest veterinary hospitals, probably the busiest in the world. Being in New York City, it exposes you to quite an array of cases, people, and situations that simply can't be recollected, recreated anywhere. AMC is like a reality show before reality shows came about. So you really can't, anyone who's been through an Animal Medical Center training experience has a grin on their face, and you don't even try. You just nod and go, you were there? Yeah, I was there too. You know, it's one of those experiences. The number of hours you work, the number of people, the number of cases. So you see things literally you'll see nowhere in the world. And it brings people together. It's how I met my wife. My connections to AMC exist today, and they're all over the world. There are people, I was just at a meeting in Japan. I was at a meeting here where I met a veterinarian from Japan, and I was lecturing in New Orleans. And it was a Japanese vet who remembered me from Animal Medical Center, talking about it like it was yesterday. There are people at my hospital today, at Long and Vet Specialists, that I met from the Animal Medical Center days. In fact, many of them are from AMC. So those bonds, when you survive something like that, it creates connections that last forever. And it's a part of you. It's part of how you practice. A lot of people say that's like my family experience. You know, it was perfect for me. I think AMC would have burned up some people. Some people flourish in an environment like that. They call it learn by fire. But it takes a certain type of a person to flourish in a circumstance like that. And it's all the things that we talk about, how you're brought up. How do you react when obstacles occur? What drives you to overcome obstacles? How do you adapt to situations that are outside the box that you've grown up in? And AMC was fertile soil for all of that, and it was perfect for me. I showed up at AMC as an outsider. You know, most people at AMC are inbred. They were very much at the time, we're the Animal Medical Center, we train our own, we do it our way, and that kind of mantra. I was one of the people that they interviewed from the outside. It was very rare to hire an outside doctor, and for some reason, they took me. I interviewed there, and I thought it went horribly. I thought the interview went horribly. They talked to me. They were very cold, very disinterested. They're a very arrogant place. They're the best. We don't need you. We train 30 residents a year, 30 interns a year. Why would we take an intern from somewhere else? And so I interviewed, and I thought, well, I'm not going to rank them very high, and they're probably not going to rank me high. I remember on my application, they said, send in a picture of yourself. And as my grandmother always taught me, look your best. So I found this tuxedo picture of myself with bi-level hair. I sent it in. I later asked them about that, and they said they cracked up. They said it was one of the funniest pictures. It made the application stand out. Here I am in a tuxedo with bi-level hair. They said, you look like a maitre d' in a restaurant. They said it was a conversation for about 10 minutes. But you know what? Grandma was right. Dressed to the hilt. And you know what? It made a difference. That application was probably talked about a little bit more because the guy in there looked like a maitre d' in an Italian restaurant. I had that funny name, Dominic Marino. I remember going to get my licensing done at Cornell the test to get New York State license. There were a couple AMC people there. And they were sent there to check me out, see if I was the kind of person who would fit in such an environment where you learn by fire. And they were kind of provoking me a bit, acting kind of jerky. And I remember saying to one of them, "Boy, you're one of those jerks from AMC, aren't you?" And they went back and reported he's perfect for the job. They later told me this. I couldn't imagine that this was working out in my favor, but apparently it was. You know, it's that unscripted pathway. So they took me after that interview that went horribly, and I showed up, and I jumped right into it. Well, you know, I because of the upbringing, you know, personal responsibility, rise to the occasion. A lot is thrust upon you. All of the residents, not just me, all the residents there had a high volume, high caseload, supervision that might have been spotty at times, but you always knew where to get help, but you weren't being spoon-fed in this environment, and I thrived. I really thrived. There was a very difficult experience that took place there. At the time I was at AMC, I graduated my residency, and I was what's called a newly minted staff person. And because I skipped a year of vet school, a year of undergrad, I was one of the youngest staff people they ever hired. I think I was 24. I was younger than the residents I was teaching. But with the salt and pepper hair, I got away with it. And AMC was undergoing some sort of administrative change where there was a divergence in pathways they wanted to take the institution. And the old guard wanted to go one way and the new guard was going another way. And the old guard consisted of a handful of people that one might argue were arguing in the best interest of the facility. And the rest of us wanted to go a different direction. Well, the pathway split, and I was newly minted staff person, and I was friends with everybody. I was looked upon as a rising star kind of thing. And I kind of was friendly with everybody, but when push came to shove, I believed in the philosophy of one group, the younger group that wanted to stay true to the mission. And a long process unfolded where an investigation took place, and decisions had to be made, and lines had to be drawn. And the old guard kind of shored up their forces and decided that they weren't going to meet hand in hand with the young guard and discuss things they were going to oust. And it turned into a battle where people were being ousted. And I was called into the administrator's office at the time and told, you know, there's two camps here, and you can make a difference by bringing the camps together. And I asked, why me? I have no pull. I'm the young guy. I'm the nobody of the group. I just got to the first staff meeting last week. They said, you can do this. And I said, I tried to have these discussions, and what I soon realized is they approached me, but I don't believe they were sincere in trying to bring things together. They were trying to find out who was on what side so they could oust people. And that process began. One by one, they were singling people out. And information was derived that things weren't being handled appropriately within the hospital. And they admitted to me that they weren't handling things appropriately, they were doing things that were inappropriate, but we've been doing it this way for a long time, and that's the way it's going to be. And at one point, a phrase was used that we have your career in our hand and we can squeeze it any moment. It's a pretty frightening thing for a young professional to hear this from the old guard who was running the hospital and the new guard who was daring to challenge the establishment that had gone astray. And again, one of those huge, huge life experiences where you have to make a decision. Your career is on the line. This is everything you worked for. You want to be a veterinarian. Everything you worked for is going to fall apart on these decisions you're about to make, and there's no one to ask for help. And I looked at the situation personally myself and decided that I was going to stick with what was right and what was up front. Having looked at documents and saw what I saw, I realized that what they were doing wasn't appropriate. So I ended up cooperating. And what that means when you cooperate is you wear a microphone and a little wire, and you participate in meetings, and people start bragging about what they did and how they got away with it and how they're going to continue to get it, how they're going to crush the opposition. And for 1 month, you had to wear a wire. And each day you had to go down to the World Trade Center where the government officials would take the wire off you and hand you a new wire to wear the next day, day after day, hoping no one knew you were wearing a wire. It was quite stressful. And Jackie knew what was going on at the time, my girlfriend, thinking, you're insane. I know she was thinking, what's going on? And I said, these people aren't right. And they eventually tried to oust everybody, including me. I wouldn't quit. They kept throwing it at me. They took away my office after 6 years. They took away my help. I was working out of the men's bathroom, trying to write papers and continue to do my job. You couldn't crack me. Every day I smiled, and every day I said thank you for having me here, knowing that they were coming after me as hard as they could. They even took away my parking privileges, so I had to find a parking spot every morning and pay for it out of pocket. I still wouldn't budge. You know, that expression, kill them with kindness, and I kept my composure, kept my professionalism, and kept smiling. When they couldn't break me and get me to resign, they finally fired me, along with 12 other people. That action resulted in a huge investigation, and the administration was fired by the Board of Trustees, or they were going to be prosecuted. So the whole house of cards out there and crumbled. Barbara Walters was involved. They formed an investigative committee. They sat us in a room and said, you people are the whistleblowers and you're protected. They can't touch you. They said each person has someone assigned next to them on the Board of Trustees to protect them. Turn to your right and introduce yourself. And I said, hello, my name's Dominic Marino. She said, my name's Barbara Walters. She said, here's my card and my home phone number. If they come anywhere near you, you call me. And I thought, oh my God, I just met Barbara. I didn't know it was Barbara Walters. I was sitting next to her thinking, I just met Barbara Walters. It was one of the most intense professional moments of your life because you can't believe this is happening. This is everything I worked for about to crumble. I thought someday I might even be administration and lead the biggest hospital in the world somewhere. Instead, everything's falling apart in front of me and I'm being fired and I'm wearing a wire. This is incredible stress. When it came to turn over the information, it was like a scene from a movie. And every step of the way, I'd bounce this off my wife saying, is this for real? So I was told, go to 1st Avenue and 62nd Street. The phone's going to ring. We're going to tell you where to be. And I'm walking around with a suitcase of information that implicated them. And I picked up the phone. They said, go to 3rd Avenue and 73rd, and the phone's going to ring. Pick it up. And I chased these phones like a scene from a movie to about 5 locations. This system of payphone phone calls. So I had to arrive at different locations and answer the phone on a certain number of rings, be given a direction to show up at another payphone, and then do the same thing again and again. It was like a scene from a movie, almost surreal. I couldn't fathom where this was leading, and I didn't know when the end point was, but I was running around with my briefcase and following the instructions, and at some point I was told to arrive at a diner, to sit down, have a cup of coffee, and someone would contact me. So I sat down nervously. Of course, there's no cell phones at this time. It's all payphones. And I had my cup of coffee, and I'm looking at each person, trembling. As I'm drinking the coffee, it's splashing in the cup, staring at everybody who walks in and walks out, wondering who's contacting me. And some gentleman walked in, and he approached the table quietly, looked past me, looked the other direction, and whispered, are you the doctor? And I said, yes, as I drank my coffee. And he said, follow me out the door. And he left, and I stood there thinking, is this a mob hit, or is this for real? So I got up and followed him out the door with the briefcase, and there was a limousine, a town car, black town car with a door open outside. And I, against my better judgment, I got in the car, and off we went. And I'm thinking, where are we going? Nervously. Again, no cell phone to call anybody, let them know where I'm going. And we arrived at the New York, I believe it was the Daily News at the time, underground entrance. And I was ushered through a bunch of corridors, which I had no idea was going by 3 people. And then I was brought into this room that wasn't lit. And it was a dark room of some